Hiking alone used to be something I really enjoyed. I know it's the very first piece of advice people give you, something you definitely shouldn't do, especially if you're a young woman. But for me, those woods felt more like a quiet study hall than any kind of danger zone. I was 24, studying biology in Virginia, and the trails in Shenandoah National Park were practically my outdoor laboratory. I'd bring my field notebook, a camera, a thermos filled with tea, and spend hours either cataloging plants or simply observing how the fog drifted through the trees. It was late November 2017, one of those damp days where fog seems to swallow everything whole. I set out early, planning just a 2-hour loop before darkness fell. About 20 minutes into the hike, I paused to photograph some shelf fungi growing on a log. Then, seemingly from nowhere, I heard a whistle. It was clear and definitely made by a person, not a natural sound. Someone clearly intended for me to hear it. Just 4 notes, rising and then falling, like a little tune. I assumed it was probably another hiker. Sound carries strangely in fog, so I continued on. However, when I stopped again, crouched down by some ferns, the exact same whistle drifted through the mist. The pitch and spacing were identical. I stood up straight, looking into the woods, scanning for any movement. I saw nothing, just thick gray curtains of fog, dense enough that even 30 feet ahead looked like smoke. Initially, I just smiled. Maybe someone was just messing around. Perhaps it was a father whistling to entertain his kids. Woods echo, after all. Sound bounces off everything. But 10 minutes later, the whistling happened again. This time I decided to test it. I quickened my pace, then stopped abruptly, hiding behind a tree. The whistle sounded right on cue. That's when my curiosity turned into caution, and then unease. I told myself a dozen possible explanations. It could just be coincidence. Maybe 2 different hikers happened to whistle the same tune. Maybe even birds were mimicking the sounds. Still, the fact remained that it only occurred when I stopped. It felt as if someone was watching me. I tightened the straps on my backpack and started moving faster. The trail wound uphill, slick with wet leaves, and the fog made the climb feel never-ending. I kept glancing back, expecting to see a figure breaking through the haze, but there was nothing. The whistle sounded again, closer this time. I gripped the small can of bear spray I carried. My professor had always told us that the fear of predators is often misplaced. The real dangers in the woods are usually slipping, getting dehydrated, or dealing with ticks. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was keeping pace with me. I tried shouting, "Hello?" But the words sounded weak, almost swallowed by the fog. There was no answer. I told myself to just reach the next trail junction. There would be a signpost there, maybe other hikers. Surely this whole situation was just in my head. The junction didn't appear as quickly as I'd hoped. Instead, the trail led into a hollow where the fog became so thick it felt like moving through smoke. It was then that the whistle cut through, sharper. Still the same 4 notes, but much closer, perhaps only 30 feet behind me. I froze, listening intently. Then I heard it, the faint crunch of a boot on wet leaves. Not my footsteps, not synchronized with mine. My chest tightened. I started walking again, faster now. I didn't care about plants or photos anymore. I just needed to get out of there. Every time I stopped to listen, the whistle followed. I tried one more time, deliberately snapping a twig loudly, then pausing mid-step. The whistle tune came again. I realized whoever was out there, they understood the game I was playing. It felt like hours passed before the trail widened near a ridge. My relief was almost dizzying, but it only lasted a second because that's when he appeared. He didn't walk onto the trail like a normal hiker. He lunged out of the fog from a side path. A man wearing a dirty jacket came towards me, his arm outstretched. I screamed. It wasn't even formed words, just pure panic tearing out of my throat. I spun around, nearly slipping on the wet ground, and ran down the trail. Behind me, I heard his boots pounding, and then the whistle again, shorter this time, sounding like a taunt. The fog blurred everything, but I was lucky. I stumbled directly into a group of 3 hikers heading uphill, 2 women and 1 guy. I must have looked terrified because the guy immediately stepped in front of me, asking what was wrong. I just kept pointing behind me, gasping, "There's a man." He was following me. He grabbed me. And then we all saw him. The man emerged from the mist just a few yards back, stopped dead when he saw the group, and turned around, disappearing back into the fog as if it were nothing. One of the women pulled out her phone. The group gathered around me while she called 911. The Rangers arrived quickly. Within an hour, a couple of deputies had the man in custody. They said he was a local, had untreated mental health issues, and was known for bothering hikers, though never before this aggressively. When they asked if he'd said anything, I told them about the whistling, how it always matched my steps, and how he had lunged at me. One of the deputies looked at the ranger and said, "Same pattern as last time." That phrase stuck with me. Last time. Apparently, he'd been reported previously for stalking, for getting too close, but nobody had caught him in the act until me. I should have felt vindicated, but all I felt was shaken. I gave my statement, rode back to the ranger station with the hikers who'd helped me, and just sat there while they made coffee and told me I'd been lucky. But it felt strange because, yes, I hadn't been hurt, but I kept replaying the event in my mind. The way he lunged with no hesitation, the way the fog made him seem like he could appear from anywhere. Story 2. It's been nearly 8 years since that hike. I still love nature. I still take photos of plants, but I no longer hike alone. I simply cannot. Every time I step onto a trail, even with friends, I listen for that sound, that little 4-note tune. Sometimes I even hear it in my head when the woods are quiet. I tell myself it was just a man with problems. Nothing supernatural, nothing that defies explanation. But when you're alone in the fog, miles from safety, and someone matches your every step, you stop caring about explanations. The only thing that matters is getting out alive. I had always thought of hiking as my reset button. I'm a veterinarian, and my days at the clinic are filled with barking, anxious dogs, worried owners, and constant multitasking that leaves my brain exhausted by the end of the day. By 2019, I'd established a routine that worked for me. Morning red rock trails, Rufus trotting beside me, his leash jingling, his tail sweeping back and forth like a metronome. Rufus isn't just a dog. He's a large, goofy mixed breed with a tan coat and floppy ears. The kind of dog who looks imposing from a distance, but is actually all softness up close. He's my constant companion, my hiking buddy, my shadow. When I was drained after late-night emergency surgeries or exhausted after having to euthanize a beloved family pet, he was the one thing that motivated me to get out the door again. That's why I didn't worry too much about hiking alone. I had Rufus. I knew the trails almost by heart, and I felt capable of handling myself in the outdoors. I wasn't careless, but I was comfortable. At least I was until that morning in late October. It was one of those mornings when the light hits the rocks just right, making everything glow a kind of orange. The air was crisp, with a slight bite of fall in it, and Rufus bounded ahead, stopping every few feet to sniff at bushes or paw at the red dirt. I had a travel mug of coffee in my hand. We'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when I saw him, another hiker approaching us on the narrow trail. He was middle-aged, wiry, wearing a faded ball cap pulled low over his forehead. Nothing about him seemed threatening. He could have been anyone. A tourist, a retiree, a local just getting his exercise in. But then he slowed as he got closer, his eyes fixed on Rufus. And then he said it. "Morning, Rufus." The leash jerked in my hand because Rufus perked up. I stopped dead on the trail. My heart did a strange little jump, the kind where you know something isn't right, but your brain hasn't caught up yet. I hadn't said Rufus's name out loud that morning. I hadn't greeted him, scolded him, or said it to anyone else. And this stranger, this man, said it as if he already knew him. I tried to hide my nerves with a forced smile. "Sorry, do we know you?" The man just kept grinning, his eyes moving between me and Rufus. "Oh, I've seen you before lots of times. You usually start your hikes around 8, sometimes earlier on weekends." That hit me like a physical blow. I remember thinking, he's not guessing. He's not just lucky. He's been watching. I pulled Rufus a little closer to me. "You must be mistaken." But he shook his head almost like he found it amusing. "No mistake. I've been following you online. Your photos, your hikes, your routines. You post more than you realize." Just then, it hit me. I did have an Instagram account for Rufus. a light-hearted page I'd created years ago to share pictures of him among the red rocks or splashing in Oak Creek. It wasn't hugely popular, but it had a couple of thousand followers. I'd never once considered it dangerous, and now here was this man standing right in front of me on a narrow trail, reciting details of my life that I'd never shared with anyone in person. I wanted to turn around and run, but the trail was too narrow. Rufus was wagging his tail, as if this whole situation was just a game. I remember thinking how surreal it was. My dog, whom I trusted completely, had no sense of the threat right in front of us. So I tried to keep my voice calm. "You need to leave me alone. This isn't appropriate." "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "I just wanted to finally say hi. We've been close for a while now." That word, close, made my stomach twist. I started walking again, hoping he'd just let me pass, but he matched my pace beside me. Every few feet he'd add another detail. "That red backpack, you use it a lot. You bought it last summer, right? I saw the unboxing photo." Or, "You always take the same loop on Tuesdays. Do you want me to show you a shortcut?" It felt like being trapped in a conversation I'd never agreed to. Every sentence was a reminder of how much he'd studied me. I tried subtle tricks to lose him, pretending to stop and take photos, tying my bootlace, letting Rufus sniff at a cactus longer than necessary. Every time the man just waited, smiling, watching me as if we were sharing some secret joke. The trail was quiet, no other hikers in sight. The red rocks, which had always felt like home, suddenly felt like walls closing in. I started thinking through my options clinically, the way I'd assess an emergency at work. Could I outrun him? Probably not. Could Rufus protect me? Maybe, but he wasn't trained for aggression. Could I get back to the trailhead before something worse happened? Unlikely. He'd likely follow. At that moment, I saw movement ahead. A ranger in a green jacket walking the trail, holding a clipboard. Relief washed over me so quickly it almost made me dizzy. I deliberately raised my voice. "Rufus, heel!" The ranger looked up and quickened his pace toward me. The stranger slowed then, as if realizing his opportunity was over. But instead of just leaving, he leaned in close enough for me to smell his breath. "I'll see you again," he said. "Don't think deleting your account will change that." Before I could react, the ranger was there, positioning himself between us. "Is there a problem here?" The man stepped back, suddenly appearing completely innocent. "No problem, just talking." But the ranger wasn't convinced. He walked me and Rufus back toward the trailhead, keeping himself between us and the stranger until we reached the parking lot. By then, the man had vanished back into the rocks. I drove home shaking. That night, I deleted Rufus's Instagram. Years of photos, our hikes, our silly selfies. My little journal of joy with him. Gone in one click. It felt like cutting off a part of myself. I bought pepper spray. I changed my routines. I stopped hiking alone, even though it had always been the one place where I felt like I could truly breathe. Rufus didn't understand, of course. He still wanted to jump into the car every morning, tail wagging, ready for another adventure. And I hated myself for saying no. Because the truth is, that man stole more than just a hike. He stole my sense of safety. And even now, years later, when I walk Rufus in broad daylight, I find myself scanning faces, wondering if he's still out there, waiting for me to let my guard down. It's frustrating and honestly terrifying that something as innocent as a social media page somehow invited a dangerous person into my life. Story 3. I make my living as a guide. People often picture hero shots on ridge lines and hanging out with mountain goats. Mostly it involves keeping other people's feet out of trouble. I've been guiding in Glacier National Park long enough to know when the ground isn't telling the truth. Maps, posts, cairns, they're all human attempts to make sense of the landscape. The landscape itself doesn't lie, but people do. And during the summer of 2018, someone definitely was. It was a clear August morning. I had 6 clients, an Ohio couple with brand new packs, a college student testing his trekking poles for the first time, a dad with his teenage daughter, and a photographer who wouldn't stop talking about the golden hour. A standard group. People were excited, nervous, out there to prove something. My job was to get them out and back safely. The route was a modest ridge climb I'd done countless times. I'd memorized every junction, every bench, every switchback that faked you out. My map was in my jacket pocket, my compass clipped to my chest strap. I was offline, but I had the track preloaded. 2 miles in, we hit the first oddity, a Carsonite post at a fork. One I knew should point left. Instead, the arrow sticker had been rotated 90 degrees, pointing right toward a faint spur trail. A smear of gray paint over old residue suggested someone had tried to disguise it. "We go left," I told the group, tapping my map. The spur looked tempting, but it wasn't ours. They nodded and followed. But 20 minutes later, another post pointed right again. This one looked brand new, with a reflective arrow gleaming. The actual trail still veered left. I guided us that way, but my gut tightened. The Ohio husband asked why anyone would tamper with the markers. I gave the easy answer, probably just a stupid prank, but kept the more serious possibility in mind. Sometimes people want you off the real trail. As we climbed, the tricks continued. A strip of orange flagging on a side trail I knew wasn't official. 6 cairns lined neatly toward a notch that led nowhere good. I kicked them down. The teenager helping me laughed it off. Still, it felt like a setup, like someone had placed those intentionally. By noon, we reached the ridge, a place where the world dropped away to a basin with a lake shimmering like a coin below. The group ate, laughed, took photos. On the way down, however, the terrain felt oppressive. Descending makes people sloppy. Knees ache, feet seek shortcuts. That's when the tampering became genuinely dangerous. At a bend, a new arrow sticker instructed us to veer right, directly onto a rock slab I knew ended in open air. The true path dipped left through trees, safe and steady. I photographed the post before guiding everyone into the trees. 100 yards later, the trail blurred into dust and trampled grass leading straight toward a cliff. 20 feet ahead, the world simply ended in silence. The photographer stepped forward for a better shot. I blocked him with my hand. "Not there," I said, sharper than I intended. We regrouped, searched carefully, and found the true trail tread half buried under branches. Someone had deliberately brushed it over. "Not random," muttered the dad. "Someone's messing with us." He wasn't wrong. We followed the corrected path until a smell of damp canvas cut through the alpine air. 10 paces off trail, hidden behind firs, sat a tent. A low-profile 2-person dome, guy lines staked, a tarp strung above it. No permit tag, no food hang. "Stay here," I told the group. I approached and called out twice. No answer. I touched the fabric. No movement. Unzipped it 4 inches. Silent. I opened it. Inside, a pad, sleeping bag, food supplies, tools, and worse, a coil of orange flagging, a roll of arrow stickers, spray paint, and a stuffed sack full of trail signs. Some carved, some burned with arrows, some blank. Whoever had camped there wasn't just squatting. They were rewriting the park. I took photos, zipped it shut, and told the group we were moving. I didn't mention the stash until later, once they were safe at the trailhead. A ranger met us about 20 minutes later. I walked him back up and showed him everything. He didn't call it malice, but he didn't need to. Law enforcement arrived. They packed the tent out. A day later, another ranger told me similar markers had been found in a different drainage. No suspect, no camper, just the same pattern. Invitations leading where no sensible hiker would go. I still guided that route. The wrong arrows disappeared. The cairns toppled for good. Sometimes I stepped off trail just to check if someone had brushed over the real way. Once the next spring, I glimpsed a figure shadowing my group from the trees, always just far enough to seem like another hiker. When I stopped, they stopped. When I watched, they ducked behind a fir. I didn't confront them. I just kept my clients moving, got them out safely, and reported it to a ranger later. People ask me if I think the person wanted to kill hikers. I don't answer yes or no. What I know is this: someone moved arrows, hid trail signs, brushed over safe routes, and pointed strangers toward cliffs. That's not a prank. And I'll never forget standing at that false junction, wind pushing at the edge, 6 people behind me, trusting me to know what was real. I don't go into the Smokies for thrills. I go because trails are like plumbing. Ignore the leaks and the whole hillside can collapse. I'm a volunteer, not a ranger. A few Saturdays a month, sometimes a longer weekend. I carry tools and do what's needed. Clearing brush, cutting new water bars, fixing tread. It isn't glamorous, but it feels good leaving a path stronger than when you found it. May 2019, a humid morning after storms. Our crew hiked into the North Carolina side carrying shovels, McLeods, and rock bars. The section we were fixing was bad. Erosion chewing straight downhill. Ray, our leader, paired us off. I was with Will, another regular. We started clearing a clogged water bar. Wet silt, roots, compost, all the usual mess. Then my shovel hit something that didn't sound like stone or wood. It pinged through the handle. Brushing mud aside, I saw a flash of orange-brown metal. I worked it loose carefully. It was a hunting knife. Rusted, heavy, blade down in the trench, as if someone had deliberately driven it there. Handle half rotted. The tang stamped with a name I couldn't make out. We set it on a rock and stared. People drop things on trails, sure. Boots, bottles, socks. But this wasn't dropped. Someone had wedged it, tamped dirt around it, hidden it. Ray radioed a ranger. Meredith came up 10 minutes later. She crouched by the trench, used tweezers to lift something we'd missed. A strip of cloth, once gray, stained dark in the center, dried blood. She bagged it, bagged the knife, scribbled notes. Karen asked, "Do you see this a lot?" Meredith looked at her evenly and said, "You'd be surprised how often this happens." Then she walked away with the evidence. That line stuck with me more than the knife. You'd be surprised how often this happens. Like it was routine. We went back to work, but my head stayed in that trench. I've seen enough injuries to recognize old blood. This wasn't a dropped tool. It was a planted one. A marker? Maybe a warning. At lunch, the new volunteer asked, "Was that a crime scene?" Ray brushed him off. "Not our job. We called it in." But even Will, who usually doesn't let anything rattle him, said, "Guess it happens more than we think." The next weekend, I asked the young ranger about it. He shrugged. "We find things. We bag them. We move on." Like that was supposed to comfort me. It didn't. I went back alone later. The trench was just dirt again. Water flowing where it should. No sign anything had been buried there at all. That was worse. Trails remember everything. Boot prints, erosion, storms. But this? Gone like it had never happened. After that, I started working slower, feeling with my boot before I dug, carrying a strip of surveyor's tape in my pocket just in case. Eli, the new volunteer, thought I was being overly cautious until he found an old corroded battery in a trench and flagged me over. He understood then. A month later, we found a child's glitter backpack under a stump. Inside, a fossilized applesauce pouch, a broken strap, names scribbled in marker, Jules. Meredith came for that one too. This time she recognized me. I asked if she'd meant what she said before about it happening often. She looked tired. It does. Most of it's nothing. Some of it isn't. We do what we can. That honesty shook me even more because it meant she wasn't exaggerating. It really does happen often. Now every time I drive up for trail work, I think about it. We swing tools, clear drainage, haul brush, but under the dirt, how many stories lie hidden where water flows, where hikers step? How many objects are tamped down, left to rot, never spoken of? I've worked trauma calls, seen the aftermath of accidents, but nothing unsettles me like the thought that the Smokies hold quiet evidence everywhere, and we just walk over it. You'd be surprised how often this happens. I wish she hadn't said that. Because now, every time my shovel hits something it shouldn't, I hesitate, and I listen for the echo of that ping, wondering if I'm about to dig up another story someone buried deep, hoping no one would ever find. Story 4. I was 23 when this happened, back in the fall of 2022. Back then, I was a college student in Asheville, North Carolina. And like most people my age, I lived a lot of my life online. I had a part-time job at a computer lab, spent nights gaming, and on weekends, I'd take my gear into the woods to unplug. Or at least, that's what I told myself. This trip was supposed to be one of the good ones. Just me, my pack, a brand new tent I'd saved up for, and Pisgah National Forest stretching out before me. I planned an overnight trip, hike up one of the less traveled trails, find a spot to set up before dusk, and hike back down in the morning. Nothing too challenging. I'd done it a dozen times before. I left the trailhead around 2 hours in the afternoon. It was one of those crisp days. My pack was heavy, but in that satisfying way. I had snacks in the top pocket, a lightweight stove strapped to the side, and my sleeping bag rolled up tight at the bottom. About an hour in, I noticed the sound. A faint buzzing, higher pitched than a bee, steadier than a cicada. I looked up and caught the gleam. A drone. At first I thought it was some kid messing around near the trailhead. People flew drones all the time, and Pisgah's scenic overlooks were basically Instagram bait. But what unsettled me was that it stayed above me. Not intrusive, just high enough to catch the sun off its rotors. And when I stopped to drink water, the drone hovered too. I tested it, walked faster. It moved, paused. Mid-trail, it paused. I told myself it was coincidence, maybe a ranger using a drone for survey work. But deep down I knew better. This thing wasn't mapping erosion or counting trees. It was watching me. By the time I reached the ridge where I planned to camp, the drone had dipped behind the trees. I set up camp in a small clearing close to a trickling stream and tried to brush it off. I boiled water for ramen, scrolled through my phone with the single bar of service I had, and told myself I was being paranoid. But the woods didn't let me forget. Around 11 p.m. I turned off the lantern inside my tent and lay back, trying to sleep. Then I heard it. Crunch, crunch. Slow footsteps circling. I held my breath. My first thought was deer. Then I caught the rhythm. Too heavy, too careful. Not an animal. The steps went all the way around the tent, paused, then started again. My dog wasn't with me that trip, and without her, the silence was unbearable. Every nerve in my body begged me to unzip the tent, but I couldn't. I clutched the multi-tool I kept by my sleeping mat and waited. At some point, the sound faded. I must have dozed off because when I woke, pale morning light was seeping through the tent fabric. I unzipped and stepped out, and my stomach dropped instantly. My gear was scattered. My cooking pot was overturned, my food bag unzipped and pawed through. Even my extra socks were lying a few feet away, damp with dew. Nothing valuable was missing except the small power bank I used to charge my phone. Whoever had been there didn't just stomp around my camp to scare me. They'd handled my stuff, chosen something specific to take. I packed quickly. The entire hike back, I kept looking up, expecting the drone to reappear, but the sky stayed empty. Back in town, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I spent the night scrolling through outdoor forums, typing things like Pisgah drone following hikers. It didn't take long to find posts. People described almost the exact same experience. Faint buzzing overhead, footsteps outside their tents, gear scattered or missing. One guy said he caught a glimpse of a man in camo on the tree line. Another claimed he'd woken to find a boot print right at his tent door. The posts always ended the same way. The culprit was never caught. Rangers dismissed it as paranoia or pranksters, but everyone agreed. Someone out there was using a drone to pick targets, to track hikers, maybe to rob them, maybe worse. It's been 2 years and I still hike, but never alone, never without friends watching my back. And whenever I hear a high-pitched buzz overhead, even if it's just a kid flying a drone in a park, something inside me locks up because I know what it felt like that night in Pisgah. The certainty that someone had marked me, followed me, and waited for me to be most vulnerable. If realizing the woods aren't scary because of bears, but because of people, resonates with you, hit that like button. Subscribe so you don't miss the next dark nightmare. And tell me in the comments, would you still hike solo after this? And if you ever thought tree houses were just fun little hideouts, you've clearly never heard these stories. Click now to watch 4 disturbing treehouse horror stories where going up is the worst mistake you can make. Thanks for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next dark nightmare.